This podcast contains adult content. Holy, I forgot to hit record and I just did like a whole spiel. Okay. Okay, let's try this again. Welcome to the James Chambers Show. I'm your host for this podcast, James Chambers. Today is going to be a little different. We've got a couple of updates in the equipment area and a couple of thank yous that I want to get out there. So I'll go ahead and do those here in just a second. And then from there, we'll move on to the main topic of the show today. And thank you for listening. And let's go to our first segment. So today, in this particular segment of the show, we're going to do something a little bit different. Here in the studio, we have a new microphone, and this is the Rode Procaster. It's a cardioid dynamic microphone. As you can tell, my voice probably sounds a little bit different. It's right now running directly into my Mackie 1402 VLZ4 mixer. It sounds, to my ear right now, it sounds very, very nice. It's very smooth. There's not a whole lot of highs. The lows are a little bit less present than my condenser microphones, obviously. The EQ is set completely neutral, so everything's just straight up and down. There's no, adjustment on that side. Now, on the other hand, my gain on the preamp and the mixer is almost maxed out. We're looking at, just within millimeters of being completely all the way up. My fader is set to 0 dB, so it's a pretty hefty mic in terms of preamp gain. However, just for a second, listen to the self noise. Don't hear a thing. You hear a little bit of stuff in the background, obviously, but that's just because we have a home. But in terms of what the mic is actually producing and what the preamp on the mixer is producing, it's really quiet, very nice. But I'm also running the preamp super hot. So to fix that, I also picked up a Fethead, which is an inline microphone preamp that I'm going to go ahead and introduce here in a second, and we'll hear the difference. It's supposed to be a neutral decibel enhancer, essentially, so it adds about 27 dB of clean gain, and it runs on phantom power, so it runs phantom up from the mixer into the Fethead to produce that 27 dB of gain, but it does not translate that phantom power into the microphone. So theoretically, it should not damage your dynamic mics or your ribbon microphones. So I guess we're going to find out and see what it sounds like. I'll be back in a second. And we're back. Okay, so now this is with the Triton Fethead preamplifier inline. I'm just going to change a few little things here on the fly. Okay, so right off the bat, I don't hear any substantial tonal difference. I do know, oh my God, there was so much gain. When I turned the mixer back on, I did not turn the gain down or anything. I wanted to see truly how much it would change between going from non-Fethead to inline Fethead. And I tell you what, I got my headphones just within 5 inches of the microphone and it fed back. And so I didn't even, I immediately cranked everything back down. But it introduced a lot of gain, which is nice because I'm still at a good recording level. Everything looks good. But now my channel preamp is at 50%, whereas before it was at probably 95%. So I'm 55%, something like that. And I backed off my fader just a little bit. So, I think it's actually working really quite well. I can still listen. Again, negligible self noise. I don't think it changed. I feel maybe it changed just a little bit of the high end of my voice, just a touch, perhaps. I don't know. It's kind of hard to tell. Listen back as I'm editing all this, but it might actually have given me a little presence boost, just a touch. But that doesn't hurt anything, essentially. So there you go. I might just dial in a few things just because I'm not used to this microphone yet. I might just bring up the bass just a little and bring down the treble just a hair. Other than that, I think this sounds very smooth, very good. I'm looking forward to playing with this microphone in the future. And I'm going to actually do this episode with this microphone with a pop filter in front of it. You can hear my plosives. I know. I'm still learning the dynamic versus the the condenser. This is a cardioid. So along with that, I want to do one quick shout out. I have been remiss. I recorded a segment a couple of weeks ago, and I since then did the hot sauce challenge, and that took a whole bunch of time to edit both the extended cut versus the shorter cut. I took a week off to write some other stuff, and so now I'm coming back. In the meantime, I recorded a couple of things that never aired, and I'm just going to go ahead and redo one of them now. And that is, we have on the show, we don't ask for contributions. We don't ask for financial support from anybody. We don't run ads. It's just me, and I'm just talking to people I want to talk to and talk about things that I want to talk about. But we were donated to the show a fantastic device that really has changed the way that the show is running, and I'm so grateful to this patron of the show. I'm not going to say who that is. He's been kind of hesitant to be out there, and that's okay. I'm totally respectful of that. But he did provide us with a fantastic upgrade of the mixer, which is the Mackie 1402 VLZ4 mixer, which, this thing's going to last me for a while, a good long while. And so I'm just exceptionally grateful for that. And you already know who you are, and I've spoken to you directly and expressed my gratitude, but I want everybody else to hear it too. So thank you so much for that. And you'll actually notice probably the other people who've listened to other prior segments with smaller mixers, with other equipment, with different microphones, the setup now sounds fundamentally different between this mixer, this dynamic microphone, and the rest of the setup that I've been running. So we're going to try this out. We're going to see how this mic goes. I'm going to learn a different mic technique because this is different than the way I'm used to doing because my cardioids, I'm using an end address as opposed to a side address. I'm using a dynamic versus a condenser. So things are changing. So I apologize up front if I pop the mic a little bit, or if you hear my breath, or if it's plosives or whatever. Just bear with me on that. So again, thank you to our patron. I tremendously appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who's supportive of the show. I appreciate you as well. All right. And we'll continue on after a bit. Recently, I came across a story about a troubling trend here in America, one that I really had no prior knowledge or understanding of. Over the years, I have heard of cultural traditions of arranged marriages, of betrothal, and marriage to young children, mostly girls, but in the context of other countries or religious traditions in some far-off land. I certainly didn't think about child marriage as a Western first world problem. I didn't know that it is possible in all 50 states of the Union that an adult can legally marry a child with all of that, all the idea of the marriage entails, including the honeymoon. Between the years of 2000 and 2010, there were 248,000 children as young as 10 years old legally married to adults here in America. Now, many states set the legal marital age at 18 years old, but in every single state there are exemptions that can be made to bypass the legal age requirement. And more than that, 25 states have no minimum legal age to marry at all. So did you catch that? You heard me right there that by law, a 40-year-old man could legally marry an 8-year-old girl, for example. He becomes her legal guardian. And we all know what happens after the wedding ceremony, right? Her husband can legally sexually molest her for years, and it sounds horrifying because it is. No child can consent to marriage, especially that young. No child can consent to a sex act that young. I mean, we have a legal framework of statutory rape and abuse in this country, and in every single state, that fact is hiding under the guise of holy matrimony. There are two common exemptions used to validate child marriages. One is, parental consent. If the parents agree that, or they're actively trying to push their child into marriage, often that can be enough. State laws typically don't allow the clerk who is filing the marriage certificate to ask the child if they're being coerced or forced into marriage. They don't even have the opportunity to even ask the kid if they want to get married or if they're being forced into it. The clerk simply does not have that authority. The second part is judicial approval. Many states don't have a lower legal age limit to marry, and so therefore there is no boundary for a judge to impose if they're being asked to validate a child marriage. Typically, states allow judges to validate marriages that in other circumstances would trigger a statutory rape charge. Rural states like Alabama, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Idaho top the list of child marriages. They are largely poorer communities and traditionally highly religious. Child marriages are often considered to be the solution to the problem of premarital pregnancy, especially when that pregnancy is the product of a statutory rape. If the parents are supportive, most prosecutors are willing to just waive the rape charge if the perpetrator marries the victim. Some religious conservatives claim that without child marriage, the rate of abortion would increase. So we just swap one hypothetical evil for an actual one. They tend to believe that the actual institution of marriage just itself will be enough to create a happy, healthy, and economically secure home for the new family. A family, made up of an 11-year-old girl and her 27-year-old husband. Let's just remember that the divorce rate for the average normal, non-rapey couple is over 50% across the socioeconomic spectrum. It's just magical thinking to believe that a child marriage will end up in anything other than abuse and pain. This problem is not relegated to, hyper-Orthodox religious groups. It's not exclusively the problem of the poor either. While child marriages tend to happen more in rural, poor communities, it does happen in urban, affluent settings as well. And yes, all of the big three religions here in America, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, have metaphorical blood on their hands on this issue. Study after study have demonstrated that 80% of child marriages end in divorce. They lead to increasing school dropout rates, a much higher rate of spousal abuse, both physical and mental, and not to mention the psychological damage done from repeated coerced sexual contact and just flat out rape of a minor child. And here's some information that I pulled from The Economist. Quote, married children are twice as likely to live in poverty and 3 times more likely to be beaten by spouses. Around 50% more of them drop out of high school, and they are 4 times less likely to finish college. They have a considerably higher risk of diabetes, cancer, stroke, and other physical illness, and they are much more likely to suffer from mental health problems. Look, I probably shouldn't do this, but, oh well, screw it. It wouldn't be my show if there wasn't just a little bit of a rant here. I mean, where are the supposed pro-life groups now? Where is the just indignant rage and pomposity and the life is God's creation and it extends all the way to conception and life needs to be protected rhetoric? Where is that? People are using the institution of marriage to allow pedophiles unfettered access to children, mostly little girls. If you are truly pro-life, why don't you quit trying to climb inside women's vaginas and chain yourself to their cervix like a hippie blocking a foresting crew and go after the real damage being done to our children, like legal marital rape or sex trafficking or children's health care or getting healthy, sustainable foods for their kids and the mothers? How about dealing with the actual, real, existent life first? And later we can argue about your need to be in other people's hoo-has and to make other people bend to your religious convictions. It's just that the more I dig into this subject, the more just stomach churning it becomes. Just the fact that there is a legal framework for child molesters to happily do their work is beyond me. How did our priorities get so disgustingly turned around that we will label a man who, peed in public as a sex offender, and we place him on the sex offender registry because he exposed himself in public, while at the same time there are men raping little girls while enjoying the full protection of the law? It's just mind-boggling. And I know I've been kind of pointing out the extreme examples so far, and I've done that because, these cases are real and they're happening all over the country. However, in the interest of fairness, I want to point out that the vast majority of minor marriages are girls who tend to be 16 or 17 years old. That's way more common than the extreme case of, an elementary age child who's being married off. Just because the majority of the children being married tend to be in their mid to, late teenage years, it doesn't excuse the 3 10-year-old girls in Tennessee who are married to men aged 24, 25, and 31 back in 2001, or again in Tennessee in 2006 with an 11-year-old boy married to a 27-year-old woman, or the marriage licenses issued for 12-year-olds in Alaska, Louisiana, and South Carolina, or the 11 other states issuing marriage licenses for 13-year-olds, or the 14-year-old girl who is married to a 74-year-old man in Alabama, or the 17-year-old who was wed to a 65-year-old man in Idaho. I mean, this is all happening across America now. Well, why don't they just run away? Why don't they get a divorce? I hear you cry. Well, 10-year-olds are not typically the experts on legal nuance that you would want them to be. And what's worse, remember that these kids are not legal adults. They are under 18. That means that they can't file for divorce. Hell, they can't even retain the attorney to file the divorce. They can't sign a lease. They can't open a bank account by themselves. They can't go live in shelters because their spouse is also their legal guardian, and the shelter would be harboring a minor child against the will of the guardian, and they could actually be charged for kidnapping. The system is so deeply fucked up that I'm having a hard time just kind of grappling with it. Even the U.S. State Department recognizes that marriages before 18 years old is a human rights abuse. So it's good enough for the U.S. as a country to demand that other countries stop their human rights abuses of child marriage, for example, unless it's our kids, of course. So this comes from the State Department via the Washington Post. U.S. lawmakers are strongly at odds with U.S. foreign policy. The U.S. Global Strategy to Empower Adolescent Girls, released last year by the State Department, lists reducing child and early forced marriage as a key goal. The strategy includes harsh words about marriage before 18, declaring it a human rights abuse that produces devastating repercussions for a girl's life, effectively ending her childhood by forcing her into adulthood and motherhood before she is physically and mentally mature. Well, what's good for the goose, as they say. Well, hey, here's something fun. Here are the countries that have outright banned child marriages in the last 4 years. Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Gambia, and Chad. We are so crazy scared of the violence and gangs and drug cartels coming up from Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, yet these countries have figured out that letting child molesters marry children is a bad thing. I wonder when America will figure that out too. A few U.S. states are finally doing something about child marriages, like Texas and Florida, Virginia, New York, and Connecticut, who all have passed some legislation to limit child marriage under the age of 18. There's a few loopholes in those bills, or those introduced bills, but hey, the ball's rolling, so you can't really knock that too bad. 16 states have introduced legislation that has they either limit or ban child marriage, and there are 28 states that haven't done a damn thing. But you can. I know there's so much going on in this crazy country, but we can actually do something about the kids who are trapped in sexually and mentally abusive marriages. And we can help those kids who are heading down that same path right now. Visit unchainedatLast.org and help end child marriage once and for all in this country. No child should have their innocence, their sexuality, and their childhood ripped away from them because we turn a blind eye to pedophiles and child molesters and the parents who enable them. Again, the organization is Unchained at Last. Visit unchainedatLast.org to get involved. Thank you for listening to the
I don't want to be married. Are you kidding?
Episode of The James Chambers Show. Please leave your comments in the section below and feel free to email the show at realjcshow2017@gmail.com or find us on Twitter at realjcshow. I'd love you to share the JC Show with others, and we would love it just as much if you click subscribe. If you already subscribed, Thank you. And also, we need to thank the Washington Post, CNN, The Economist, The Independent, Girls Not Brides. Check them out at girlsnotbrides.org. The Conversation, Unchained at Last, BBC News, and The Guardian for the information that was referenced in this piece. Thank you guys so much. Love you. Talk to you next time.